You're crushing deadlines, staying late, picking up slack, carrying projects across the finish line. And somehow the person who does absolutely nothing not only keeps their job but seems completely untouchable. No performance reviews, no warnings, no consequences whatsoever. Meanwhile, you're wondering if the entire system is designed to punish people for being competent. My name is Sam, and today we're breaking down the 4 mechanisms that protect the laziest employees while high performers like you get buried under their workload. Once you see how this actually operates, you'll never look at your workplace the same way again. If you've ever covered for someone who contributes nothing, if you've watched slackers get promoted while you get more work, if you're tired of being penalized for reliability, stay with me. Subscribe. If you want workplace dynamics explained with actual psychology, not corporate platitudes, drop a like. If you've already lived this nightmare, let me take you back to a job I had a few years ago. I worked with someone we'll call Brian. Pleasant enough guy, always friendly, no personal beef whatsoever. But when it came to actual output, Brian was a black hole. The rest of the team was stretched across multiple responsibilities because management loved running lean and maximizing efficiency, which is corporate speak for understaffing. Everyone understood the situation. Everyone carried their weight. Everyone except Brian. Brian would roll in around 9:45, spend 30 minutes in the break room talking about whatever game was on last night, eventually make his way to his desk, where he'd spend an alarming amount of time refreshing social media. His tasks were mostly self-directed, so most days we just ignored it and kept moving. But periodically, we'd have cross-functional projects. That's when things got painful. Brian would dodge every assignment he could, claimed he was underwater with other work. On the rare occasions he actually agreed to a deliverable, there was maybe a 15% chance he'd follow through. The rest of us would scramble to cover what he dropped. His unfinished work became our crisis. And somehow, we ended up catching heat when deadlines slipped. Here's the part that really burns. Because high performers are wired to be team players, we didn't just tolerate it, we enabled it. We'd stay an extra 90 minutes to finish what Brian abandoned. We'd quietly redo his sloppy contributions before anyone noticed. And if you're being honest, you probably do the same thing. You don't think twice about stepping in because that's just who you are. You might even be conflict avoidant about it. But that's a different conversation. The point is, if you've lived this, you know how maddening it is. But here's what I've learned since. It's not random. It's not bad management. There's a specific playbook that underperformers follow whether they consciously realize it or not. And it starts with mechanism. 1. Mechanism. 1. Lazy people have obsessive clarity on what actually matters, not what should matter, what actually gets measured and enforced. If you're high performing, you probably chase excellence across everything. Every metric, every deliverable, every interaction reflects your standards. You take pride in exceeding expectations because that's your wiring. Lazy people don't operate that way. They operate on what I call the enforcement threshold. They know exactly which boxes need checking to stay employed and which ones are purely performative. If I'd asked Brian to list his core responsibilities, the ones that would actually trigger consequences if missed, he could have rattled them off instantly. More importantly, he knew which responsibilities nobody actually tracked. He knew which deadlines had real teeth and which were suggestions. He knew which managers cared about output and which only cared about appearances. While you're burning energy trying to excel at everything, lazy people are calculating what they can skip entirely without detection. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, they're correct. Nobody notices. Because you're the one quietly filling the gaps they leave. That invisible safety net you provide is exactly what keeps them employed. Pattern interrupt. Show graphic. High performer workload versus low performer workload. Gap filled by high performer covering slack. Cycle illustrated. Which brings us to mechanism 2. Mechanism 2. Lazy people master strategic energy investment. They do the smallest amount of work possible for the maximum return on visibility. You've probably noticed this. While you're head down grinding through deliverables, Brian's wandering around having extended conversations with people from other departments. He's getting coffee with a director. He's making small talk in common areas with someone from leadership. And somehow, to people who don't work directly with him, Brian seems like a solid employee. That's not accidental. Research on career advancement shows actual job performance accounts for a surprisingly small portion of what determines promotability. Visibility and perception carry far more weight. Lazy people understand this instinctively. They don't waste energy on work nobody important will ever see. Instead, they invest that energy in being seen, being liked, and being perceived as valuable even when they're contributing almost nothing. And remember that 15% of the time Brian actually delivered? It was never random. It was always on projects with leadership visibility. When executives were watching, Brian was suddenly engaged, focused, vocal about his contributions. The moment attention moved elsewhere, so did his effort. But it gets worse, because lazy people don't just strategically show up when it matters. They also claim credit when they don't deserve it. I've watched it happen repeatedly. Someone else does 90% of the work, pulls the late nights, solves the hard problems, and the underperformer swoops in at the end to attach their name to the outcome. They exploit the fact that high performers tend to be humble. You're not broadcasting your contributions. That creates a vacuum they happily fill. They position themselves as the architect of every success they barely touched. And as infuriating as stolen credit is, there's something that stings even more: getting blamed for their failures, which leads directly to mechanism. 3. Mechanism 3. Lazy people build accountability shields. They're positioned to receive credit for wins and deflect blame for losses. It starts with what I call asymmetric expectations. Here's how it works. Your manager knows exactly who on the team is reliable and who isn't. They know if something critical needs handling. You're the safe bet. They also know asking Brian is pointless because he'll either dodge it or botch it, and they'll end up coming to you anyway. So, they skip the middle step and come straight to you every time. This creates a vicious cycle. Because you're reliable, you get more work. Because you handle more work, they expect even more from you. Meanwhile, Brian has almost nothing on his plate. So the bar he needs to clear is practically at ground level. You're being evaluated on a completely different scale than the person 10 feet away. But it doesn't stop there. Lazy people also use what I think of as crisis delegation. It's not formal where a manager assigns work. It's where a colleague simply doesn't do their part, and you're left holding the consequences. When Brian didn't deliver his piece of a team project, we had two options: do his work for him, or let the whole thing fail and deal with fallout. And since our names were attached to, we always chose option 1. Brian knew that. He counted on it. He understood creating enough pressure would force someone else to step in. And once they did, he was clear. If the project succeeded, he'd share credit. If it failed, he wasn't the one who did the work. So blame landed on whoever actually tried. Some people call that delegation. And honestly, that's exactly how leadership often perceives it. When an underperformer passes work to others, management doesn't see avoidance. They see someone who knows how to leverage their team, which ironically is a skill they look for in future leaders. The very behavior making your life miserable is the same behavior getting them promoted. Pattern interrupt. Show promotion pathway. Lazy employee delegates work, seen as leadership potential. High performer does work, seen as execution focused, not strategic. And that brings us to mechanism 4, and it ties everything together. Mechanism 4. Lazy people are not a problem for the people with power to fire them. Think about it from your manager's perspective. Brian isn't missing major deadlines because he barely has any. He's not creating conflict because he avoids doing anything that could generate it. He's not threatening anyone's position because he's not ambitious enough to be a threat. He's not making mistakes because he's not doing enough work to make them. Sure, there are complaints about workload imbalance. Sure, people grumble about fairness. But the work is still getting done. It's getting done because you and the rest of the high performers are absorbing everything Brian drops. From your manager's perspective, there's no fire to put out. The team is delivering, metrics look acceptable, and Brian is pleasant, visible, drama-free. Why would they disrupt that? Firing Brian creates a vacancy they need to fill, a hiring process they need to run, a transition period that could actually cause the disruption they've been avoiding. Keeping Brian is the path of least resistance, and most managers will take it every single time. And here's the part nobody discusses. Many people in leadership got there by doing a version of the same thing. They networked, they delegated, they managed perceptions. So when they look at Brian, they don't see a problem employee. They see someone who reminds them of their own trajectory. That's not comfortable. But it explains why the system protects these people instead of holding them accountable. So here's where this leaves you. Lazy coworkers are not your manager's problem. They're your problem. You're the one absorbing their workload, covering their mistakes, burning out, trying to maintain standards they never had. None of that is your fault. The system is designed to exploit your reliability and your willingness to do whatever it takes to deliver. But understanding the game is the first step to refusing to play it on their terms. You can start setting boundaries. Stop automatically volunteering for work that isn't yours. You can get strategic about your own visibility instead of just grinding in silence while someone else takes the spotlight. And most importantly, you can stop being the invisible safety net that makes their underperformance sustainable. The playing field was never level, but now you can see exactly where the tilt is. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. If this helped you understand your workplace differently, subscribe. I'll keep breaking down the dynamics nobody else wants to talk about.